Okay, so it's 8:05. Let's begin. Just to double check again, can you hear me clearly? Sometimes my microphone cuts out. Okay, great. So welcome everyone to tonight's talk. It's great to see you. Quite a few familiar faces. And it seems to be a smaller group tonight, intimate sized group. The topic of tonight is how to start one's study and practice of the Buddhadharma. I think at least half of you have already been practicing for many years already. But interesting to have you here. I think it shows you have a beginner's mind, still having curiosity in how to approach the study and practice of the Buddha's teachings. So that's great. For tonight's talk, I prepared a bit on, first of all, just to give you a basic outline. First of all, what is Buddhadharma? Talk about that. Really, what is it? What is it not? And then to talk about what is a person's intention in approaching the Buddhadharma. Why study it? Why practice it? And based on that, the third point would be to match our path of practice to our goal. If our goal is one thing, the way that we practice and study should be in accord with that, or should go in that direction. And then the next point is, whether or not to practice alone or to engage in this, the Buddha's way alone or with a community. And then the following point would be the concepts, how to approach the actual concepts of the Buddha's teachings, followed by the final point of methods of practice, how to approach that. So that's the basic outline of tonight's talk. And I plan to share based on my own experience and based on the basic teachings of Buddhadharma, fundamental principles that are shared by all schools. But of course, since the tradition that I studied and grew up in is the Chan or Zen tradition, I'll be sharing from that perspective, from having lived or living this approach of Chan Buddhism, Zen Buddhism. Okay. So, okay, we still have some people joining on right now. Let's start with, what is Buddhadharma? I mean, it seems simple enough. The Buddhadharma, Dharma in this context, just means teachings, or it could also mean the way. The Chinese word is fa. Could just mean the way. So the Buddha's way, or it could mean the teachings of the Buddha. And obviously this is the teachings of the historical Buddha, Gautama, who lived in India around 2,500 or so years ago. So his teachings, as well as the teachings of his immediate students, but this also includes generation after generation of Buddhist practitioners, or the teachings of people who've practiced this way over the generations up until this present time. What are these teachings really based on? Well, we can look at the Buddha's teachings in terms of three main aspects, sometimes referred to as the three pillars or the three studies or the three practices: ethics, concentration, and wisdom. We could also describe it as discipline, of moral discipline, mental stability, and self-awareness. Chinese is 戒定慧. The main purpose of these three practices, as the Buddha taught, is to resolve our suffering, to resolve our psychological dis-ease. And when we do that, we realize wisdom or compassion, and compassion, or we live in a way which is wise, suffering less, or ideally without suffering, without psychological turmoil or agitation of any kind, and being able to live skillfully with others. We could say that's roughly wisdom and compassion. So that's the essence of the Buddha's teaching, of the Buddhadharma. I think it's important to also make a distinction of the Buddhadharma is not religion, or it doesn't equal religion. Buddhadharma doesn't necessarily equal Buddhism. And what do I mean by that? Well, Buddhism, the word that we use, Buddhism, it refers to the religion or the organized presentation of the Buddha's teachings that includes culture. It includes a lot of faith or belief and practices that are particular to that culture. So, for example, we have Buddhism, that we have Chinese Buddhism, which includes Chinese Chan Buddhism or Zen, the ancestor to Japanese Zen. But within Chinese Buddhism, there's also schools that focus on different aspects. Those different schools, even within Chinese Buddhism, have their own sort of unique cultural things, unique practices. But let's just look at, okay, in general, we have Chinese Buddhism, which is a part of Mahayana Buddhism, which is kind of the development of the religion in East Asia, in Asia. There's also Theravadan Buddhism, or often referred to as the Southern tradition, which developed in Thailand and Cambodia and parts of Vietnam and as well as Sri Lanka and various other countries. And then we have Vajrayana Buddhism, which developed in Tibet. All of these different traditions originating in India, where the Buddha was born and lived, but eventually expanded throughout various countries through various cultures. And as you can tell, if you were to go to each one of these different schools or cultures of Buddhism, you'd find they're very different in terms of their appearance. The temples look different. Some are gold and bright. Some are darker, more subdued. Some have lots of color. Some are very plain. Some have giant Buddha statues, bigger than, a few stories high. Some have no Buddha statues, maybe just have a circle, or maybe no particular image. So within these different cultures and different peoples, there's different presentations of the Buddha's Dharma, of the Buddha's teachings and practices. Everything from the physical space to the clothing, to the language, and to the etiquette. You may have noticed different Buddhist monastics have different kinds of robes and colored robes, things like that. And there's different etiquette. Maybe some people will bow often to each other, or for example, uh, in in Mahayana Buddhism, it's typical that you'd see a monastic bow back when a layperson bows. Maybe in a different tradition of Buddhism, the monastics don't have that habit. Someone bows to them and they accept it. They may chant something for that person. Instead of bowing, they may chant something or give a blessing. So it's a different kind of etiquette, different expectation. All of these different things are part of the religion of Buddhism. They're not necessarily essential to the Buddha's Dharma. So, for example, why they're not necessarily essential? Well, you could first of all be a Buddhist without being a monastic. I think all of you know that. But you can also practice the Buddha's Dharma, the Buddha's teachings, without even being a Buddhist. You don't have to be Buddhist to practice the Buddha's teaching. You don't have to identify as Buddhist, or you don't have to go to a temple or go to retreats. And you don't have to be a believer, so to speak. You don't have to agree with everything. I still don't agree with everything, or maybe don't resonate with everything. Does that mean I'm no longer able to practice the Buddha's teaching? Not at all. You don't have to be a disciple of someone. You can live an ordinary life, wear ordinary clothes, do your own practices in your own home, and so on. You don't necessarily have to subscribe to certain cultural practices in order to be practicing the Buddha's teachings. However, I don't mean to say that religion is not useful, or that these different practices of different schools of Buddhism are not useful. The structure, the organization of of Buddhism is important, because probably without it, the Buddha's teachings could be lost. The purpose of the religion is to maintain and perpetuate these teachings. And so it has a package, it has a form in order to identify itself. That's why the Buddha chose to have his monastics shave their head and wear robes, to in a way have a brand or have a sign to show that they're doing something different. They're doing something different. They're living in a way that is different than, we can say, the mainstream society. So these forms of religion are useful. They're useful tools. But if you don't feel like taking part in it, or if you don't feel like taking part in all of it, that's no problem. You can still practice the Buddha's teaching. But making use of these tools, for example, making use of statues, making use of certain clothing even, making use of etiquette like bowing. Everyone bowed at the beginning. That's kind of nice. It's like mutually showing respect towards each other. These bowing practices have a function, so they're useful. But if you don't want to bow, and if you don't feel comfortable doing, the deeper bows to the floor, it doesn't feel right to you, it's fine. You can still practice and benefit a lot from the Buddha's teachings. So the main point I'm trying to make here is really just that what's essential to the Buddhadharma are the basic concepts and methods for resolving suffering, which is not at all limited to culture or form. In the same way that math is just math, right? I don't think there's like American math, Canadian math, Mexican math, Chinese math, whatever math, right? It's just math. There's basic principles to doing mathematics. However, it may be taught differently in every culture, and all the textbooks look different. And from what I hear now, math is taught in a very different way than when it was taught when I was in grade school. Not sure what that is, but I trust that the teachers weren't lying to me. So a different form, a different way to teach it, but the principles are essentially the same. So I think it's important to make that distinction, because people who just want to, or people, if you don't feel ready to join any kind of religion or join any kind of community, which in a way you have to now adapt to a culture. You're almost adapting to a new kind of culture, this culture of the religion or that particular school of Buddhism. That's okay. I hope you still feel free to approach the Buddha's teachings in a way that's comfortable for you. As long as you're following the principles and practices, you're following the Buddha's way, Buddhist or not. So why would we want to study the Buddha's way? Why study? Maybe some people are curious. They just hear it's useful. Or maybe they bump into Buddhists and these Buddhists seem to be smiling and happy. So like, what's it all about? It must be something to Buddhism. They seem kind of happy and lighter looking. Maybe. Maybe some people do, they do have an interest in the religion, in being a part of the organization and this community of Buddhism, because they may be kind of tired of religions that are more theistic, more focused on a God, a creator God, and having this opposing or opposite relationship, dualistic relationship with this God, the kind of authoritarian teachings that may be in some of those religions. I've heard that some people come to Buddhism because of that. They're looking for something that doesn't stress so much a dependence on a God, but a dependence on oneself to deal with the struggles of life. Some people may approach the Buddha's teachings to gain knowledge, or maybe it's an academic pursuit. Maybe some people are lonely. They would just want to be part of a community of people who are kind. Other folks may be dealing with lots of stress, sort of looking for a way to relieve it. Some people, I found, are actually looking to gain wealth or to gain power, even some kind of superpower. They hear that religion and even Buddhism talks about superpowers. So they may approach it with this view of getting some special power to gain wealth and success. Others may really want to develop and work on their character. They may notice they have flaws and problems which make life very difficult. They may get angry a lot or have very difficult relationships. They hear that practicing the Buddha's way can develop one's character. And maybe you just want to be a master of yourself, to be able to master your own mind. Many people, including myself, I think this is the reason I came to the Buddha's teaching, was because I felt that my own mind was out of my control and that I suffered a lot. And I knew that I was causing my own suffering, but at the time I felt I couldn't do anything about it. And I heard the Buddha's teaching is about mastering your own mind, gaining mastery of yourself, and being able to live with peace and freedom. So depending on the goal, right, we want to match our process or match our approach to our goal. In the same way that if you want to exercise, you need to have a goal, right? If you just exercise and say, oh, I'm just going to exercise just to exercise. Okay, well, what do you do? And how do you go about doing that? It's not very clear. But if you're exercising to build muscle, okay, well, there's approaches to focus on building muscle. If your approach is to build endurance, okay, Well, that's actually quite a different exercise or a different training approach than building muscle. That training approach focuses on building endurance. Or maybe some people want to build both. They want to build muscle, build strength, and also improve their endurance. There's a training program or a training approach that facilitates that. So for people who are just learning the Buddha's teaching just for knowledge, okay, well, if you just want knowledge, then you can read a lot, right? Read a lot, talk to people who are experienced, have dialogues. That's can be your approach. If you're studying the Buddha's teaching for academics, you really want to go deep into the theory or the research of the cultural history of Buddhism, the theories, how it developed. It's quite an academic approach. Well, maybe you can just go to a university that has Buddhist studies. Columbia University has, from what I hear, quite a good Buddhist studies program. It's not a paid advertisement, by the way. And Zhonghua Institute in Taiwan, which is founded by, or maybe it's not founded by, but my teacher was you could say, president at one point of that Institute for Buddhist Studies. That's another kind of place you can go for academics. If you're just interested in methods like meditation, different ways to concentrate the mind, okay, you could practice meditation, but you don't have to necessarily study the Buddha's teachings. Meditation just for the sake of concentration is one thing. There are many different ways to do that. But if you approach the study of the Buddha's teachings just with methods, you could just read on how to meditate, you're really not going to benefit from the whole of the Buddha's practices. If you don't have the theory behind Buddhist meditation and mindfulness, you'll get benefit, but you won't get the benefit of what the Buddha taught. You won't get the benefit of what's called wisdom or insight, but you may feel calm, relaxed, and concentrated. But you can only go so far with that direction. So for someone who's interested in personal development, improving one's character, or mastering one's own mind, to do that, we need both concepts and practice methods. If we just have one, if we just have concepts and knowledge, it's just an intellectual thing. It's useful, but it won't help us to resolve our suffering and realize wisdom, which is the purpose of the Buddha's teaching. If we only have methods without concepts, again, we end up getting some benefit, but it doesn't go so far, doesn't go so deep. So having both concepts and methods, this is the recipe or the approach for getting the most benefit out of learning from the Buddha's way. For some people, they're also looking for support, community support from people. Support along this path of practice. So I'd like to talk now about practicing either alone or in a community. Practicing alone, it's possible. Oops, sorry about that. It's possible to practice alone, but it can be very tiring. It can be very tiring because if we're practicing and learning the Buddha's teachings alone, we're kind of, what are we basing that on? How are we doing that? Is it just reading books? Reading books is helpful, but books themselves, they're not alive. Books are books. We could say they're dead in a sense that it's just words on paper. It may work for some people. They can read, they can practice, and they can gain a lot of benefit. However, it can be confusing. What if we don't understand fully what we read? What do we do then? Who do we go to? Do we just kind of keep thinking about it? Do we try this and try that? We could do trial and error, try to figure things out, but that can be very tiring. And it can also be damaging in a way. Damaging if we misunderstand the concepts and we apply them incorrectly, we can end up actually damaging ourselves, causing harm to ourselves. How? Well, just as an example, I'll use my own personal example. Before I encountered a community and any teachers or any people experienced in the Buddha's way, I was just reading books, studying a lot, trying to meditate, but I was really doing it quite intensely and with a lot of physical tension and mental tension and a lot of incorrect approaches. And I was meditating and at some point, I was getting headaches because I was approaching it wrong. I was getting headaches, neck aches, back aches, and even felt like I was almost passing out at one point because I was so intense in trying to get enlightened, even though I wasn't sure what that meant. I knew I wanted it, and it sounded good. That was kind of, in a way, banging my head against the wall because I didn't have guidance. I didn't have someone I could go to, or I wasn't looking yet. And so, that it was tiring, it was confusing, and I did feel quite lonely. I felt quite alone, as if the whole world was doing something else, and I'm doing this thing called learning from the Buddha's way. It was quite, it was difficult, very challenging, and often discouraging. So there's a saying that, 1 in 1 million people can learn the Buddha's way without a teacher. And probably that person may not even need books. But most of us, we can really benefit from having a teacher and a community. So how can working with a teacher benefit us? And when I use the word teacher, it can refer to, let's say, an accomplished teacher who is well learned in the theory, well practiced, and is very good at guiding others. It can be an accomplished teacher, or it can just be a friend, someone who's experienced in the practice at least farther than we are, and they can help us along. So there's a term called virtuous friends, or 善知识, people who have experience and a certain amount of wisdom in the practice, and they can help us. What's the benefit of working with a teacher or such a person? So firstly, like I said, the teacher can just provide the right concepts and can help us understand the concepts of the Buddha's teaching. For example, what does suffering really mean? What is the cause of suffering? How does that work? What does the end of suffering really mean? What is this nirvana and enlightenment? What does that refer to? And what is the path? What is the path of practice? What are the methods? This is all knowledge and concepts, right? Kind of like a map is what we use if we want to travel in this area of land that we've never traveled on before. Can we do it without a map? It's possible, but we could go in all these different directions, get lost, get hurt. We may eventually find end up where we want to. But if we have a map, and if we have a person to point out how to use the map, that can save a lot of energy. It can be safer and give us direction. This is one of the functions of the teacher, to provide knowledge. A teacher can also provide guidance in the method, how to practice. So for example, with meditation, how to sit, how to do sitting meditation. There's a particular method, and an experienced teacher can guide us through that every step of the way. When we encounter obstacles, we can refer to the teacher for help. Not only can the teacher provide knowledge or methods, they can also be a mirror for us. A mirror meaning to help us reflect on ourselves. By having a living person who can observe us or be with us, at least for a period of time in our life, to spend time with this teacher, even at this practice center, interacting in different contexts, the teacher can observe us and provide feedback. Help us see blind spots, help us see flaws with our character that we wouldn't have seen if we were just practicing by ourselves. In the same way that if we have a mirror, we can see what's on our face. We can see if there's dirt, if there's blemishes, and we can take care of them. If we don't have a mirror, it's kind of like we can feel around, but maybe we're really missing this big spot. We're missing something in our teeth, kind of like when our friend says, you got something in your teeth there. We're like, where? Here? Here? No. Here? No? Where? Here? No. We're feeling around trying to pick at it. We just don't see it. If we have a mirror, it's like, oh, there it is. It's this giant green piece of lettuce or something. It's obvious when there's a mirror. So to have a teacher and to have friends on the path, they can be those mirrors for us to help us see ourselves in ways that we couldn't see alone. How many teachers should we have? Should we only have one teacher? Can we have more than one teacher? I think having one main teacher or one teacher that we often refer to is good because there's a certain consistency there. There's a consistency in terms of what we're learning. There's a consistency as well in the relationship. That teacher would get to know us more and be able to mirror us better. If we're just changing teachers all the time or going here, going there, we never really get to know a teacher. They don't get to know us. There's a kind of limitation there in the way that they can help us. However, in my opinion, I think learning from not only one teacher is good. To have a main teacher, but to also learn things from others, possibly in different traditions. If it's all within the Buddhist tradition, you're all learning the Buddha's way. But different teachers have a different way to express things, which is, I still find it amazing to this day. The Buddha's theory and practice, it's fairly simple. But each person can express it in a different way that may touch us or that may resonate with us better or worse. So, learning from others, learning from a few teachers can be beneficial, but having one consistent connection and relationship is important. However, the relationship with the teacher or the boundary of teacher and student is also important. This may not be talked about much within Buddhism, or maybe the teacher themselves don't address this. But we've seen that within not only Buddhism, within any kind of teacher-student relationship, if there isn't a healthy distance, a healthy boundary, there's problems. So what's a healthy boundary? A healthy boundary in terms of physical contact, and a healthy boundary as in terms of personal sharing or personal engagement. Meaning, if a teacher and a student start to become more just like friends, even that much can be a problem. Why? Well, if the teacher starts sharing a lot about their personal issues with you, how could that affect your study and practice? Just kind of imagine that. Your teacher comes up to you and says, "Oh, today was really terrible. You got to hear, what my wife said, or you got to hear what my husband said, or you got to hear what my dad's been doing. This is terrible." They start telling you about their family life and their problems, as in the same way a friend would. This can really affect your study. So although teacher-student relationship can be friendly, it shouldn't be the same as a friendship. And if, even the relationship becomes that the role becomes confused. The teacher starts to ask you to help with personal things. Hey, can you come over? I got to fix something. I need some help. I need a few extra hands. The whole relationship of teacher-student becomes unclear, and you're learning less and less of the Buddha's way, and it may just become more just like a friendship, and you get involved in each other's lives. This kind of lack of boundary can be a problem. And of course, it can go further into a intimate relationship with very strong emotional attachment. At that point, both of the person's minds are blurred, and it's all about emotional attachment. It's about liking each other. It's no longer about learning Dharma. Now there's just this emotional entanglement, that can destroy the relationship, which actually was beneficial in the beginning, and now just becomes entangling and problematic. So it can be tricky though. And it is more the teacher's responsibility to create and maintain that boundary. But if you yourself, in getting close to a teacher, find that the boundary starts to become blurred, or it starts to become confusing, you're not sure, is this person acting like a teacher, or they want me to be their friend, or they want me to be their intimate partner? Those are signs that you need to create distance in order to really have a healthy teacher-student relationship and really benefit and learn the Buddha's teaching from them. So teacher-student boundary is important. One more point about boundary, though. Even if it's a healthy relationship, the teacher is clear they're the teacher. The student is clear they're the student. There's no entanglement in each other's lives. But if we as a student are overly dependent on the teacher, and whenever we get into trouble, we think, oh, let me just go find my teacher. Teacher, what should I do? Teacher, what should I do? Teacher, help me out. Or if you're always going to that person to receive almost like this emotional comfort, that kind of relationship for the student, that kind of tendency to be over dependent is also a problem. Because now you're in a way training yourself not to be independent and learning to be free from suffering. We are now creating a bondage to this person and just looking for emotional comfort instead of looking for the way to free ourselves. We become emotionally bound or dependent. And for those of you who've, been close to teachers or, gurus, very famous teachers, this can happen easily, especially when there's an unrealistic view of the teacher, which is the next part. In working with a teacher, we need to be clear that the teacher is an ordinary person, right? If the teacher claims to be a Buddha, be careful. Be very careful. And I would say stay far away, very, very far. Why? Because teachers who claim to be Buddhas essentially are claiming to be perfect without any flaw, without any problems. A person who uses this idea of being a Buddha in this way, are they really without any flaw, any problem? Are they perfect? Are they saints? And if they were saints, would they advertise themselves? Hey, look, I'm a saint, come study with me. That doesn't sound very saintly. It sounds either arrogant or it sounds deluded. So be careful of teachers who claim to be saints or perfect, and be careful of communities that view their teachers as perfect. If you find a lot of the students are all saying things, this person's so perfect, this teacher is so enlightened, they never do anything wrong. If you have problems, just go to the teacher and they'll fix it. That kind of community, it's likely an unhealthy view of who the teacher is. Teachers are ordinary people, ordinary human beings. They have flaws, they have attachments, they don't have all the answers. And the teacher's role is not to tell us what to do with our life, right? The teacher's role is to help us find our own path, find our own way out of suffering. If the teacher starts telling you what to do with your life, what school you should go to, who you should marry, who you should divorce, what you should do, this and that, that's also a problem. And be careful. There was even a story of a Buddhist teacher, modern teacher, who was telling their students who to marry. Imagine that. That can be a very scary and entangling kind of relationship. So if we have a clear understanding or a clear view of the teacher's human, and they have a lot of positive qualities that we can learn from, most importantly, they have a clear view of the Buddha's teachings that we can use ourselves to navigate through life, then that's a good way to view the teacher and a good way to evaluate what is a good teacher. Someone who tries their best to practice the Buddha's way and who empowers students to find their own way. That's a very healthy approach to student-teacher relationship. But what about attending maybe different communities' activities? Do we have to stay with only one community? Well, I see it that in the same way that we can learn from different teachers, although we have one main teacher to have a consistent connection and relationship to, I think we can benefit from learning from different communities, but maybe have one main community which we consistently practice with. We get to know the people of that community. We get to feel more comfortable in that community. And again, we're mirrored better by the people who know us. If we just jump from one community to the next, we go here for a retreat, we go there for a retreat, we go to this talk, that talk, here and there, we don't really get to know people. They don't get to know us. Again, the mirroring will not be as strong. And we probably won't go deeply into something because we're kind of just touching the surface here and there. However, every community has their own strength. So maybe one community, you may find that their meditation practice and teaching is excellent. So you go to meditation retreats with this community. Maybe a different community has a very strong theoretical teaching or curriculum. So you find that going to their curriculum is very helpful, while going to the other community for meditation is helpful in applying it. That can also be quite beneficial. But to having one place you call home can really help you settle into the practice within that tradition, be mirrored by others, and feel comfortable. That can really benefit your practice. But where do we start? How do we know which community will work for us? Maybe we don't. Some of us may be lucky. I feel I'm quite fortunate. I think it was only the second or third community that I went to, it felt like home. For others, they may have to go shopping a bit. So try this place, go there for a while, doesn't feel right. Go to another place, You don't really connect or resonate, not the same kind of crowd, try another place. It may take time to try out, feel it out within these different communities, observe others, and also experience what it's like to be observed or mirrored by others and helped by other friends on the path. Eventually, we'll know which place is suitable. You'll know because that practice group is helping you to reach your goals and because you feel comfortable. Maybe you don't feel comfortable with any of them, so practicing alone for a while is the best path for the time being. Maybe that's possible. Or maybe there's a smaller group. Maybe you don't feel such a connection with a large religious community, but maybe there's just a small group of people who you feel good, strong connection to. And studying the Buddha's way with this group of 4 or 5 people can really help and sustain your practice. That's also community. So this is with regards to learning from a community and a teacher. What about when it comes to the content of the Buddha's teaching? The concepts, the theory behind the Buddha's way of practice, the Buddha's way of living. How do we approach this? Sometimes this can be really challenging as well. Have you folks, I assume many of you have, read quite a bit of the Buddha's teaching, whether it's the original discourses of the Buddha, maybe some later texts from well-known masters, teachers, or modern books by modern teachers, right? There's a lot out there, right? There's a lot out there in the bookshelves from modern day, from now, this period of time. But even, 1,000 years ago, there's already this complete collection of the Buddha's original discourses, as well as all the teachings throughout generations in this collection called the Tripitaka, which is literally the 3 baskets, or the sutras, the Buddha's original, supposedly the words the Buddha spoke himself or close disciples spoke at the time of the Buddha. There's commentaries, that's another basket. Commentaries meaning later teachers giving comment to the Buddha's original words. And then there's the Vinaya, or the teachings about morality, ethical living. You could fill a very large bookshelf with this collection of teachings. So it's like, how do we even approach this, let alone all this new stuff that keeps coming out? Sometimes maybe we can't even keep up with one Buddhist magazine per month. It's just too much. So I'd like to talk a little bit on how to approach the theory, how to approach the study of the Buddha's teachings, how to get this map clear, theoretical map. Well, one approach, which I think can be helpful, is start with the fundamental teachings. Actually, start with the talks and the teachings the Buddha gave. And what's called the fundamental teachings that are within all schools of Buddhism. We could say the basics, the 4 Noble Truths, the 12 links of conditioned arising, as it's called, the Eightfold Noble Path. These teachings are present in what's called the Nikayas. The Southern Tradition collection, or the Southern tradition that maintained these in a certain collection, is called Nikayas. In the Northern School of Buddhism, it's called the Agamas. And many of these teachings are quite simple, quite repetitive, but really talk about the basic principles. What is suffering? What is the cause of suffering? What is the end of suffering? What is the path? Teachings on impermanence, selflessness. This is kind of the basics, the basic bones of the Buddha's teachings. After having read that for a while and familiarized yourself with the basics, it then makes sense to approach the more advanced teachings, the teachings that are built on top of those. Just to check in with, can you still hear me? There's a bit of background noise. Okay, great. The advanced teachings, we can say, would eventually the Mahayana Buddhism developed out of these later or advanced teachings that build on the basics. Teachings which emphasize Buddha nature and the compassionate vow. Teachings which is called the Tathagata Garbha Sutra. I wish I had time to spell all of this, but you'll just have to take some notes. Teachings on Buddha nature, compassion, teachings on wisdom, teachings that focus on the empty nature of things. This is called the Prajna Paramita teachings. It's a collection of Buddha's teachings on emptiness and how that applies to freeing ourselves from suffering. And there's also teachings on consciousness, how the mind works, the different functions of the mind. It's more of the analytical teachings of Buddhism. We could say this is the Buddhist psychology. It expands greatly upon the Buddha's basic teachings of psychology in much greater depth. It's called consciousness-only teachings. So these, we could say, are advanced teachings built on the basics that help us to understand more deeply our mind, to understand more deeply the importance of making vows or compassionate aspirations, as well as understanding how we attach and how we can unattach. We don't have time to go into details of this, but starting with the basics, going to advanced teachings, and then going later into commentaries. Because the commentaries are further explanation, taking the Buddha's words, explaining them more deeply, more thoroughly. They're longer, take more time to go through. So if you don't have that time, starting with the basics is good. If you have the time, you can explore some of these commentaries, the ancient commentaries, and you can also explore modern commentaries from modern authors to help you understand the Buddha's original words. As far as the Vinaya goes, it's mostly about monastic morality and ethical practice. But if you're interested in that, you can explore the Vinaya teachings and see how that applies to wisdom and liberation. You know, how do the monastics practice in a very diligent way to be free from cravings? And so, beginning with the Buddha's basic teachings, the Buddha's closest to what the Buddha's words were, later going through teachings and then learning from modern teachers, modern explanations in a modern context. It can help us understand how to apply this to our modern way of living. So books, podcasts, videos, all this is great. But then there's one thing, just to be careful not to crave too much Dharma, not to crave podcasts and crave Dharma talks. And if we end up listening to Dharma talks while we're doing other things, like we're washing the dishes, listening to a Dharma talk, we're walking, listening to a talk, we're cleaning, listening to a talk, we're talking, listening to a talk, we're working, listening to a talk. I don't recommend that, because are we really listening to the talk with our whole being? And maybe even now, maybe somebody's playing the music listening to my talk. Is your mind fully with the talk? Or is it with the music? Or is it with some other show? You know, we want to study the Buddha's way with all of our body and mind, all of our attention, in order to really absorb it. Only when we fully absorb it and it becomes clear to us intellectually can we practice it skillfully. So next, I'd like to say a little bit on methods of practice. And this I'll just talk about briefly, because I think for methods of practice, the best way to learn about methods is really to go on retreat, to put yourself in an environment that's designed for learning how to practice the Buddha's way. Meditation retreat is often a great way to do that. But in general, when we approach learning methods of practice, again, these methods develop self-awareness or develop mindfulness, or we use mindfulness. We use our full attentiveness to develop awareness of our body, our feelings, our thoughts, our intentions, and our awareness itself. How does our mind work? How does our attention work? What's it like to really be a human, to see and hear and feel, but do so fully mindfully? Methods of Buddhist practice may begin with things that develop more concentration and focus, but really the heart of Buddhist meditation and the heart of Buddhist practice in general, which I think we can safely use the word mindfulness. The Buddha's way is the way of mindfulness, the way of being fully aware of ourself and the world. It's helping us experience our body, feelings, thoughts. It's helping us experience our body and mind as they are in this moment, in relation to the environment, in relation to others, not only on the cushion, but in activity. Mindfulness of our life, body, mind, environment, in activity. Through that awareness, immediate experiencing and awareness of body, mind, we develop wisdom, which means we first develop a clear awareness of how we suffer. What's it like to suffer? How do we suffer? What's that really like? What is our mind doing that's creating suffering? That's part of what we experience. That's part of what we're mindful of. When we really experience fully how we suffer, we can learn to undo it, or we can learn to not do it. We can learn to not suffer only after we learn how we're suffering. Suffering is sometimes described as being caused by clinging, holding on to things, holding on to material things, holding on to our own body. And this is meaning psychologically holding on, clinging to material things, clinging to our own body and mind, clinging to feelings, even clinging to mental states. If clinging leads to suffering, then it's said that letting go leads to liberation, freedom from suffering. We use methods to experience that. What's it like to cling? What does it mean to hold on to things psychologically? What's happening? When we experience it, we can learn to let go. We can learn to free ourselves. We can learn that it's our nature, or we have this capacity to be free. Even right now at this moment, we have this capacity to be free as long as we don't cling. But just hearing that, just thinking about that, doesn't free us. We use methods to help us experience it, experience the suffering in order to experience freedom. We use methods to experience clinging in order to experience letting go. So in terms of concrete methods, we have sitting meditation, which is often what people think of first when they think of Buddhist mindfulness, sitting meditation. A very important practice and probably the easiest setting to learn about ourselves is just stopping completely and sitting. But there's also walking meditation or walking mindfully. We can also extend this to mindful movement. So different practices or even exercises or physical training, whether it's yoga or even lifting weights. Lifting weights can be done mindfully, can be done as a way to practice being aware of body and mind. And even sports, certain sports that don't focus so much on winning or competition, but that focus on awareness. Certain sports can help us train and develop insight. But we can also say that service, another method of practice, is actually being of service to others. This is not necessarily a concrete method. There's many different ways to be of service, to volunteer ourselves to others, to give of our talents to others. But the practice of service is quite powerful in that it can help us let go of our selfish interests and to use time just to give without looking for something, without craving for something, just giving. This is a powerful way to let go of cravings, let go of aversion, and you make use of ourselves to help others. This, we could say, is a method. It's often referred to as charity in the Buddhist terminology. Charity, dana. And finally, in addition to these different methods, there's the discipline, the Buddhist ethical code itself is a method. How to behave in our daily life in a way which promotes health, well-being, and wisdom and compassion, as opposed to a way of life that leads to harm, lack of health, confusion, disharmony. So the Buddhist ethical way of living is another method, or another set of methods that can help us develop self-awareness, understand our suffering, and gradually free ourselves. So this is just a basic presentation of how to approach Buddhadharma, how to approach the Buddha's way. Everything from understanding what it is, to understanding our intention, why we're approaching it, then matching our intention or matching our goal with the path, practicing with a teacher, a community, or maybe alone, and then having a plan or a way to study the theory, have a good, clear map of the practice to eventually then learn methods and apply these methods. So I think I'll finish here with the talk. And we do have a couple minutes for some Q&A, for some interaction if you folks would like to interact a bit. And just to let you know, for the Q&A part, we're recording my talk and we'll post my talk on the internet, but we won't post the Q&A part, so you won't appear in the video. Anybody have any questions or even feedback on what I shared tonight? You can feel free to speak or text. I think the text box should be open now.
Thank you, David, for the talk.
Thanks, BJ.
Wonderful talk. Thank you. And my question is regarding the sutra study or reading. If you had any advice for, I keep sutra hopping, a little bit of Heart Sutra, commentary by Master Cheng and Complete Enlightenment, which makes not too much sense sometimes. And then Gilbert mentions Dharma Sutra, a little bit of that. And then catch hold of Sutra of the Six Patriarchs. So sutra hopping and inconsistency with sticking to one sutra. I see it as a problem, but it's not a problem. But if that's something, if we had any advice to stick to one sutra, or is that okay?
I think reading different sutras or reciting a number of sutras is fine if it's a part of your training regimen or your practice regimen. In the morning, you recite the Heart Sutra. In the evening, you recite the Diamond Sutra. On the weekends, you recite the Complete Enlightenment Sutra. I think recitation is okay. But if we're reading and trying to understand and reading the commentaries, really trying to penetrate the meaning of a particular sutra, then sutra hopping is not really going to help, right? Because we're going part way in this one and jumping to another one. It's all the Buddha's teaching, so there are principles that, of course, are common in all of them. But each sutra it's like a different angle. It's presenting the Buddhadharma from a different angle, and there's a different context. Each sutra is given to a particular audience, right? So I still think it makes sense to stick with one sutra until we finish, really immerse ourselves in that, try to understand the context, understand why the language is used in this way, and, take time with it before moving on to something else. And if we ever find that one sutra is just like, it really doesn't make much sense to us, and there's so much of it that we find is hard to understand, maybe it's better to actually go back to a more basic teaching, because maybe we've jumped to a sutra where we haven't yet got the fundamentals. So the advanced ones don't make so much sense. Like the Diamond Sutra is a lot of negation. It's negating a lot of things, or using language that negates this and says this is not that. But if we haven't learned what those things are in the first place, we don't even know what's being negated. The same thing with the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra, to really understand it, you have to understand all those concepts as a basis before we understand what's being negated. So I still think the approach of focusing on one sutra at a time is more beneficial. But when we're just reciting, it's okay to recite different kinds. So thanks for that question. Someone, Gina wrote, what if you lose the sense of belonging to the group that used to feel like home? Yeah, that I don't know, that sounds kind of sad, huh? Is it sad to not feel belonging, or is it just like you just don't feel it anymore? Yeah, this can happen. The group may change. People come and go. People who were there in the beginning may be gone that we were very close to, or maybe the culture itself of a certain center may have changed. So what it was in the beginning is actually, it just appears and is very different than now. I don't know what to do. What do you think? Do you feel like you're not getting benefit there? Do you feel excluded? You don't have to answer if you want, because this is like, it's personal. But I would say that it's important to feel comfortable and to feel that we belong, feel that we're included at a practice center. Because it's right. It's painful to not feel like a part of belonging. It's not a comfortable feeling. It's not enjoyable. And it may even be more painful to go, right? So, maybe there's a pressure to feel like we have to have this like allegiance, or we feel this loyalty to the place we started with. I think sometimes we can feel guilty, or other people may try to make us feel guilty for not being so-called loyal. But I think if it doesn't work for us, if it really doesn't feel like our home, then to go someplace else is fine. And it's all temporary too. Doesn't feel like home now. We leave, go someplace else. We go back and it's like, wow, it feels like home again. That happens too. But I would think that whatever feels right, whatever feels like home and where we feel comfortable is the most conducive to learning, to practice. Sharon asked about the plan of learning. How should I start the planning? Are you referring to this whole practice, or just the concepts, like the theoretical part? If it is regarding the theory, I mean, it may take a little bit of work to find out which of the Buddha's teachings are the basic ones, which are which ones are advanced. I sometimes wish I had an overhead so you guys can see things more clearly. But I would start in that kind of sequence, from basic teachings to more advanced. And even, Wikipedia is great for that, huh? You could find a lot there of general ideas and general, you could find out the general structure of the Buddhist theory, the Buddhist canon, a collection of teachings. That basic structure, I think you can find there. But in terms of the whole practice, I think it's important to work on all three of these major studies, or the three approaches to the Buddha's Dharma: ethical living, training our mind, stabilizing our mind, and study and reflection. So we can do it at the same time. We can develop these things in tandem. We said tonight's talk was finished at, will finish at 9:15. So if you folks have things to do, feel free to sign off. I'll just answer the last couple of questions for those of you that have time. So if you have to leave, I understand. Monica said, a common way of practice is to recite the Buddha's name, recite Guanyin. How does this help for someone whose goal is personal growth or improving their character? Oh, that's a great question. Well, through the practice of reciting, we are, in one way, training our mind to be able to just recite one thing. We're training our mind in concentration. And along the way, we'll learn how distracted we are. And we'll learn what is distracting us. What are we craving that's pulling our mind away from just reciting? Or what are we disliking or hating and thinking about that's pulling our mind away from reciting? Or what is the state of our mind? Are we blurry? Are we lethargic? Are we anxious and tense? We learn all that about ourselves when we just try to recite and do this one thing at one time. So although it seems very simple, we're experiencing our whole self as we recite, as we train ourselves in just reciting this one thought again and again, right? So kind of like a blacksmith making a sword, pounding the metal again and again and shaping it. It's a very simple process of, just banging on a piece of metal again and again, but it's also refining this piece of metal, hitting it with a hammer first, grinding it, smoothing it. In a way, it's a simple thing, but the process is a gradual refinement. So we're refining our character in the same way when we recite. Thank you, MY or my, for your feedback. Monica has another question, but let's first see. I think Ruth has been raising her hand for quite a while. Ruth, is that a raised hand?
Thank you, David. Yes, it is indeed.
Okay.
I have a really hard time with the sutras, and I've been really thinking about it. And I had a dream about this word Abhidharma. So I got up and I'm like, oh, then maybe the Abhidharma. And that is kind of a hole that I fell into. But where does the Abhidharma? I mean, it feels like it's kind of like a lot of like Buddhist psychology, but it seems I know that's deep. I think it was going to take me my whole life to study that. But is that something that I should study possibly? Like, if it came up, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the Abhidharma is commentaries on the Buddha's original teaching, and we can say it's the earliest kind of Buddhist psychology. It goes into a lot of detail on the workings of the mind. I personally don't know how helpful it is to study Abhidharma unless we have a practice which is taking us through that experience. For someone who's practicing meditation very intensively, not tensely, but intensively, they're spending a lot of time meditating, and they're experiencing these states and can actually perceive these intricacies of the mind, then the Abhidharma is quite useful, because it's a map, or it's an affirmation of what a person is experiencing and guiding them through it. But if we're not experiencing those things, going through that very detailed, subtle experience of the mind, studying Abhidharma can just be more knowledge, and more somewhat confusing knowledge, because it's removed from our experience. Some of it may be useful in providing a structure and direction, but a lot of it is just very detailed explanation of something that's not in our realm of experience at the moment. So I think there's a danger in approaching it too soon, but it can be useful at some point.
Thank you.
That's my take on it.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's almost like explaining to someone how to do like a really complicated gymnastic flip when they can't even do a cartwheel. It's like they're just listening to it like, okay, whoa, but they're just not there yet. Might as well just talk about how to do a cartwheel really well. Sharon has a smiley face laughing. And then Monica has another question. Spoke about Buddhist ethical conduct as a way of practice. We make mistakes. No one's perfect. How do we practice after we make mistakes? So this is a great question. With the Buddhist practice of ethical living, we all make mistakes. But there's a practice of reforming, or there's a practice of first recognizing mistakes in a healthy way. Not in a way that makes us feel worse, which is guilt. Guilt is just thinking again and again of how bad we did something, right? I did this. I can't believe I did this. This is terrible. I'm so dumb, or I can't believe I did that. And it's this obsessive thinking about how we've done something bad, right? That's guilt. From the Buddhist approach, we use the word repentance. Also sounds kind of heavy. But I like to use the word introspection, which is just recognizing that something was a mistake, recognizing that it was harmful. It's like, yeah, I did this. That was harmful. I hurt myself. I hurt other people. Let's not do that again. It's like it's a recognition of the harm, and it's a reminder and a vow to try to improve, a vow to reform. Yeah, I know that was harmful. Next time, I'm going to try not to do it. And now I'm going to try to do something to prevent myself from being put in that situation where I could make a mistake. So it's actually doing something about the mistake, making a change. So there's no need for guilt there, right? Guilt is just a burden in the first place, and it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to change. Introspection is recognizing it, making a change, and we actually feel freer. We'll feel lighter. And by reforming, we're going to make the mistake less. We may make it again and again and again, but the more we recognize it, the more we make changes, then we can prevent from, endlessly repeating the mistakes. So from the Buddhist perspective, it's a kind of recognition and reform. And it's a healthier, lighter attitude.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, Monica. Okay, any other questions or even feedback? Sometimes I'm not sure if I say too much or too little, too much detail, too little detail in the talks. I'd appreciate any feedback you have either now or in the future. If you'd like to reach out, if you have other questions about the practice, I'm going to punch in the email that you can contact me at. So you can find me there or on Facebook, but Facebook is really just posts. If you had questions or feedback, you can email me. Okay, so shall we finish here? Okay, thanks everyone for coming out tonight. Appreciate you and hope to see you soon. Take care.